Hello everyone, welcome back to another Top 10 Commander video. This time we're going to be doing artifacts. It's a little bit different than what you think though. We're going to have some criteria. It's not just like mana rocks or Ashnod's Altar, mana sources, because the whole list would just look exactly the same, and I don't want to bore you all. So this is going to be the top 10 non-mana related artifacts. They can have like some loose association with mana production, but it can't be a direct result of, like tap this card and add such and such mana, or sacrifice this creature and add mana. If it's a mana source, it can't be on the list. So to start it off here with number 10, we have Meteor Golem / Spine of Ishsaw. Two very similar cards, and you could argue one is better than the other, depending on what you can take advantage of easily. But entering the battlefield and destroying a target non-land permanent is so freaking powerful. It's an uncommon, it's not a very difficult card to come by, but it's something that does see consistent play because, while it is expensive, that is just flexible removal you could throw into just about every deck. And if you are playing an artifact deck, it's so easy to take advantage of. It's so easy to make copies of artifacts. It's so easy to get artifacts back from your graveyard to the battlefield. I'm a big fan of when artifacts are just useful in general. Doesn't have to be something overwhelmingly powerful. This is a consistent ability, and it's a reliable one. It's something that's going to help you in every game. And then number 9, we have Walking Ballista. This card is insane because you can take advantage of +1/+1 counters pretty easily in Commander. We have a ton of doubling season effects, but even if that's not what you're doing, Walking Ballista is still a fantastic combo card that sees consistent play in some of the most competitive decks. If you have a Mikaeus the Unhallowed and some way of sacrificing Walking Ballista, you just win the game. It's very versatile if you're looking to deal damage and you're not going to combo. I think it's still pretty useful. It has a way of adding more counters to itself. Just such a useful creature in a wide variety of decks. Then number 8, we have Panharmonicon. Panharmonicon came to us in the previous set, Kaladesh, and it has been one of the more consistently played non-mana artifacts. If you can double your ETBs, well, it's very easy for you to combo, it's very easy for you to win. Even if you don't combo, you're going to get double value for basic, commonly played cards like Muldrifter. You may have to pay 4 mana before you can do anything else, but it's well worth it. Sooner you get this out there, the better. You don't want to wait to get double value for your cards. You get double value for your artifacts entering the battlefield as well, so don't forget about that. And then number 7, we have Isochron's Scepter. Sees a lot of play in combo decks because all you really need is a dramatic reversal and some artifacts, and you have a combo there. Pick any kind of 2 mana instant, and you could just keep playing it. You don't really have to worry about getting it back from the graveyard. If you have a Swords to Plowshares, if you have a counterspell, throw it onto an Isochron's Scepter. It's repeatable, and you'll be able to play the best spells in Commander. Number 6 is Rings of Brighthearth. There are just a ton of activated abilities that you can take advantage of in Commander, and this in combination with Basalt Monolith will give you infinite colorless mana. But even if that's not what you're interested in, it's still incredibly useful outside of those infinite combos. There are creature activations that when they tap, they allow you to draw cards, such as Arcanus the Omnipotent. You pay that 2 mana and then you get to draw 3 more cards. It's a card originally from Lorwyn, so a long time ago that has aged pretty well. And you have a good artifact when it's like Isochron's Scepter and it still sees consistent play. Just a ton of decks you can throw it into. And then number 5 is kind of a shared spot here. It's Sword and Feast of Famine, but it could literally be any other sword. I think depending on the situation, the swords are just good, at the very least because they give you protection from 2 different colors. You give that protection to a creature, so you can swing in uncontested on an opponent who likely doesn't have the blockers. And if you do connect, if you do deal damage, things like Sword of Feast and Famine are even more powerful. They make easily the best go-to equipments if you're playing a Voltron deck, and that's what most people do. I think that's a big reason why they're on here, or why they should be on here. The problem with most of those decks when you're trying to deal commander damage consistently is having the right protection, because not every equipment is going to give Shroud or Hexproof. And then number 4, we have Winter Orb, maybe one of the most powerful artifacts on this whole list. There are many situations where you get this out there, you've pretty much won. It's not really a matter of if, it's when, because so many decks just make it impossible for your opponents to overcome that disadvantage. If your lands remain tapped and you're only allowed to untap one a turn, very few decks can overcome that. Maybe artifact decks that have mana rocks that will untap. If you're a big fan of resource denial, it doesn't really get much better than preventing your opponents from getting the mana that they need. It's easily searchable too. I mean, 2 mana artifacts, there are 1,000 ways of getting to those, and I think in a format that depends on tutoring, if you have an easy to get to card, it just means you're going to consistently get it out there and do the same exact thing every game. It's not a fun strategy by any means, but it's one that is definitely powerful. And then number 3, we have Crucible of Worlds. This ability is featured on other cards as well, but Crucible of Worlds, again, it's super easy to search up. It sits on the field, and you can interact with the lands in your graveyard. If you have a lot of fetch lands, if you have a commander like the Gitrog monster, where you're consistently losing your lands to the graveyard and you can just keep replaying them, you have a significant advantage over your opponents, because what's the usual thing that happens in every commander game? You eventually run out of your consistent land drops. You might spend the first 4 or 5 turns playing lands, but then you'll have a turn where you don't draw a land. This makes it so that every turn, if you're playing the right deck, of course, you'll be able to play a fetch land or something like that from your graveyard, so you won't need to constantly draw into more lands. This is why land decks are always towards the top of competitiveness in just casual EDH. The average EDH game, if you're playing against a landfall deck or anything like that having to do with lands, it's going to be one of the more difficult decks that you can beat, because of the mana advantage, and Crucible of Worlds has made this kind of strategy even more viable, because it's not just about searching up the lands that you need, sometimes you can just play them from your graveyard. And then number 2, we have Sensei's Divining Top. This was very close between this and Scroll Rack. I think Sensei's is more consistently played. There are some ways you can take advantage of Scroll Rack that is more impressive, more impactful, but Sensei's can also combo. You know, Sensei's has its advantages, I think, more consistently, even if it doesn't offer you the ability to put cards from your hand on top of your deck. With certain abilities, this can pretty much help you win the game. If you're a big fan of Elsha and that artifact deck, Sensei's is pretty much crucial to that strategy. But like other cards on this list, if you play it outside of the combos, if you play it outside of those interactions, it's still a very good card for 1 mana. It's one of the best turn 1 plays in the game, because afterwards, you just have to spend 1 mana to look at the top 3. You get to always choose what the top card of your deck is going to be out of those 3. It's also a card that can protect itself. If there's a board wipe that deals with artifacts, you get to draw a card and put it on top of your deck. So they can't really deal with it easily, and you'll just keep getting it back. So out of all of the non-mana artifacts, I mean, we're talking about something real special here. So before I go on to number 1, I want to talk about some honorable mentions here. We have the Scroll Rack, as I just mentioned. I think it's a brilliant card. Maybe not the same kind of card as a Sensei's Divining Top, but you can certainly take advantage of it. Mesmeric Orb is also a fun card. If you're playing Mill, this is perfect. Very cheap artifact. We have Nevinrul's Disc. Again, if we're talking about removal, colorless removal, you're going to want to entertain things like Meteor Golem, Nevinrul's Disc, just so you have ways of destroying permanents. So number 1, I rarely do this. I don't like doing it too often. As I said, if I included mana rocks on this list, it would almost be every entry. Like every number would have to be shared. But I have Lightning Greaves and Skull Clamp. I think as equipments, these are both on a similar level of broken. Skull Clamp might be just a little bit more broken, but it's open to interpretation. Whatever you value more. 0 cost equip for Shroud is still pretty busted, and we haven't seen anything like it since. I guess the only thing that we have recently to compare this to is Shadow Spear, which I guess we could consider another honorable mention. If you're looking for something just to take away Hexproof or Shroud, 1 mana artifacts with pretty cheap abilities are just ridiculous, and that's the main reason why I have these 2 at number 1. They have very cheap abilities, but once you abuse them, you know why. You know why people consistently play them, like every deck. Do you have a lot of 1 toughness creatures while Skull Clamp is your card? Is your commander important at all? well, Lightning Greaves. So anyway, let me know what you think about this. I could have made a separate list for equipments, but there's nothing saying I couldn't do that in the future. Let me know what you think about the top 10 non-mana artifacts in the Commander format. Void here signing off. Have a wonderful day.